welcome.
You didn't even guess one ingredient.
So, Brad.
She played the feisty Granny on the Beverly Hillbillies, but behind the scenes, Daisy Moses, better known to the world as Irene Ryan, was hiding a final surprise that no one, especially her family, saw coming. When she died, she left behind more than just laughter and legacy. She left $1 million fortune, but instead of passing it to relatives or loved ones, she gave it all away. The decision stunned Hollywood and devastated her family. Why would she leave them with nothing? The answer reveals a story far deeper than fame, and one final twist worthy of Granny herself. Irene Ryan's early spark, the girl who sang Pretty Baby. Born Jessie Irene Noblet in El Paso, Texas, in 1902, Irene Ryan was never meant for an ordinary life. From the moment she could walk, her family noticed something different about her. How she mimicked adults, how she lit up when people laughed. Growing up in a modest home, her early world was shaped by hard-working parents and the simple joys of performance. Her first audience was her family, and her earliest stage was the living room floor. But the spark in her eyes was unmistakable. Even at that age, you could see the performer waiting to emerge. By the time she was 11, that spark had grown into something undeniable. Entering a local singing contest, Irene performed Pretty Baby, and not only won the crowd, but also a modest $3 prize. It might sound small today, but to a child in 1913, it was like holding the world in her hands. That contest wasn't just a moment of joy, it was validation. It proved she had something. That win planted the seed in her young mind that maybe, just maybe, this could be her life. Her voice wasn't trained, her technique unrefined, but she had charm, character, and a gift for evoking emotion. That would be her lifelong superpower. At just 14, driven by a fire no classroom could contain, she began lying about her age to join a traveling theater company. She dropped out of school and committed herself fully to a life on the road, making people laugh, cry, and clap in smoky vaudeville halls. She wasn't just running away from home, she was running toward destiny. In those years, Irene learned the art of resilience. She learned to perform when tired, to charm when nervous, and to adapt in a world that favored few women and even fewer dreamers. The stage would become her second skin, and by the time most girls were figuring out high school, Irene Ryan had already made a career of chasing applause. That early leap into theater didn't just shape Irene, it connected her to the man who would change everything. In the world of vaudeville, where timing was everything and partnerships meant survival, she met Tim Ryan. What began as a stage routine became a love story, and what started as performance would lead to national fame. Vaudeville in Love, the rise of Tim and Irene. It was the 1920s, the golden age of vaudeville, where stages sparkled with slapstick routines, dance numbers, and comic sketches. And for a young, ambitious performer like Irene Ryan, it was also the era of transformation. During these years, she met fellow entertainer Tim Ryan. Their connection was instant, both professionally and personally. They married in 1922 and soon after hit the road as a performing duo. Their chemistry wasn't just romantic, it translated seamlessly to the stage. As Tim and Irene, they began crafting their signature act, playing off each other's strengths, his straight man steadiness and her animated goofy brilliance. Their breakout routine, often referred to as Dumb Dora comedy, followed a familiar vaudeville formula: a ditzy wife and her exasperated husband. But Irene brought something extra. She wasn't just playing dumb, she made it smart. Her timing, expressions, and off-the-cuff quips gave their act a sharpness that audiences adored. Tim, for his part, knew how to give her the spotlight. Together, they were a hit, performing in vaudeville houses across the country. Eventually, the act caught the attention of radio producers, leading to their own program, a big leap from the traveling stage shows they had cut their teeth on. By the 1930s, Tim and Irene were broadcasting to the nation. Their voices reached thousands of homes, turning them from stage performers into radio personalities. While they eventually divorced in 1942, the breakup didn't ruin their working relationship. In fact, they continued to appear together in over a dozen short films after their marriage ended. Theirs was a rare kind of partnership, one built on mutual respect and artistic synergy. Irene's confidence as a solo performer had grown, and she was slowly carving out her own space in entertainment. But without those early years with Tim, without the grind of touring and the evolution into radio stars, she might never have developed the edge that would later define her most iconic roles. As vaudeville dimmed and the country turned its ears to the radio, Irene didn't miss a beat. With or without Tim, she found a new way to shine, this time through the speaker. The quirky, lovable voice that once lit up small-town stages was about to become a nationwide favorite. Radio wasn't just her next chapter, it was the beginning of her solo stardom. Radio waves and comedy gold, Irene's first fame. As vaudeville began to fade in the 1930s, the spotlight shifted to radio, and Irene Ryan shifted with it. Her voice, already animated and expressive on stage, turned out to be perfect for the airwaves. She landed spots on some of the most popular radio shows of the era, including The Rudy Vallee Show and The Bob Hope Show. Her comedic timing, exaggerated characters, and distinct delivery style quickly made her a household voice, even if her face wasn't yet known to many. In an age when sound was everything, Irene knew how to make people see with their ears. Audiences loved how she leaned into the absurd. She played quirky housewives, nosy neighbors, and zany best friends with an ease that made her sound natural, yet exaggerated just enough to be hilarious. Even when paired with Tim Ryan in short comedy sketches, her personality crackled. They performed in 11 short films together, adapting their radio routines to the big screen. These films weren't blockbusters, but they were perfect vehicles to showcase Irene's growing talent. Her ability to shift between mediums, from live performance to radio and then to film, was rare, and her comedic instincts, razor sharp. By the 1940s, Irene had created a brand around herself, a type of woman audiences could recognize instantly. A little goofy, a little wild, but always lovable. She wasn't playing glamorous starlets or tragic heroines. She was the comedic relief, the punchline that people actually remembered. In a time when most actresses aged out quickly or got boxed into narrow roles, Irene Ryan carved her own niche by being unforgettable. While she wasn't yet a leading lady, she had become something better, essential to every show she was part of. That recognition would build into something even greater in the years ahead. While radio brought her fame, it was war that brought her purpose. As World War II raged, entertainers stepped up to serve in the only way they could, by lifting spirits. Irene Ryan wasn't content to just perform on air. She went overseas, to the front lines, to hospital wards, delivering joy with a punchline and courage with a laugh. Her comedy became a kind of service, and for many, her presence meant hope. Serving through laughter. The war years. When World War II broke out, Irene Ryan didn't hesitate. She joined Bob Hope and a host of other entertainers in touring USO shows that brought humor to the front lines. These weren't comfortable performances on fancy stages. They were raw, unpredictable, often dangerous events held in muddy fields, near airstrips, or inside military camps. But Irene thrived in them. She cracked jokes with a helmet on, teased soldiers like they were her own brothers, and for a few moments made the horrors of war feel distant. Her humor wasn't scripted perfection, it was connection, and that's what the troops needed most. She didn't stop there. When the war ended, Irene kept giving. During the Berlin airlift in 1948, she again joined efforts to keep morale high among U.S. forces stationed overseas. She also visited wounded veterans in hospitals, always with a smile, a gag, or a silly impression. These weren't publicity stunts. Most of these visits happened without cameras, without headlines, but they left a deep impression on the people she met. Veterans would later say that her visits weren't just entertainment, they were reminders of home, reminders of what they were fighting for. Even Bob Hope, known for his tireless service to the troops, praised her work. He once said, "Laughter on the front lines is a precious thing," and Irene brought it in buckets. It wasn't about being famous, it was about being useful. Irene Ryan became more than a performer during these years. She became a morale booster, a friend, a light in dark times. And though her career could have slowed during the war, it actually deepened. Her time with the troops added a layer of humanity to her performances. She wasn't just funny anymore, she was real, and that made her unforgettable. The war ended, the world changed, and entertainment shifted once again. This time to the glowing box in every living room. Television was the new frontier, and Irene Ryan was ready. But the biggest role of her life almost slipped right past her. It would take grit, guts, and a perfectly delivered phone call to land the part that would define a generation. The Road to Beverly Hills, How Granny Almost Wasn't. When the Beverly Hillbillies was being cast in the early 1960s, Irene Ryan was nowhere near the top of the list. In fact, most casting directors dismissed her altogether. Too old, too obscure, too vaudeville. Those were the quiet whispers. But Irene didn't accept being overlooked. She had been in show business for decades. She knew how to fight for a role. So she picked up the phone and called the show's creator, Paul Henning, herself. She didn't beg, she performed. Over the phone, She spun a wild, improvised hillbilly story, so vivid, so funny, and so perfectly in character that Henning was stunned. He later said that by the end of the call, he knew this woman was Granny. But even then, she had to prove it to the network. Her screen test was arranged, and Irene came in ready to transform. She didn't just wear makeup, she disappeared into the role. Wigs, costumes, gestures, even a slowed-down shuffle added to the illusion. When she delivered her lines, everyone in the room went silent. Then they laughed. Then they clapped. The part was hers. It's hard to imagine now, but the Beverly Hillbillies almost didn't have Irene Ryan. And without her, there may have been no Granny Moses, no biting wit from the backwoods matriarch, no heart of the show. That one phone call, that one risk, changed everything. It wasn't luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity. After a lifetime of playing second fiddle or comic relief, Irene was about to become the center of attention, and she would grab it with both hands, redefining what it meant to be a television star, even at nearly 60 years old. And just like that, Irene Ryan was no longer just a performer. She was Granny Moses. The transformation was so complete, audiences believed she was really in her 80s. But behind the scenes was a woman still in her late 50s, full of energy and fire, playing the role of a lifetime with makeup, mischief, and heart. Becoming Granny Moses. A star is reborn. At age 59, Irene Ryan transformed herself into the much older Daisy Granny Moses, a character that would go on to define 1960s television. It was a performance rooted in exaggeration and nuance. The heavy makeup aged her face. The wigs added the white curls of a mountain elder. But the magic came from how she moved, how she tilted her head when angry, how her eyes flashed mischief. She didn't just play Granny, she became her. Viewers across America genuinely believed Irene was decades older than she really was. What's more impressive is that she sustained that illusion episode after episode. Her energy never wavered. While her character growled, grumbled, and threw verbal punches, Irene stayed sweet and focused behind the scenes. Her co-stars marveled at her discipline and preparation. She hit every mark, remembered every line, and delivered each joke with a comedic punch honed by decades in vaudeville and radio. For millions of viewers, Granny was the soul of the Clampett family, protective, no-nonsense, hilariously aggressive when defending her kin. The truth? Irene was nothing like her character in real life. Still, it was a role that gave her a second life. Granny Moses wasn't just a character, she became an icon. In a youth-obsessed industry, Irene Ryan flipped the narrative. She proved that older actresses could steal the show. She proved that experience mattered. And most of all, she proved that great comedy never ages. Television audiences couldn't get enough of her. And for Irene, every episode was a triumph. After a lifetime in supporting roles, she was now the centerpiece. Her name was on everyone's lips, and Granny had America in stitches. The world had never seen anything like the Beverly Hillbillies. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural juggernaut. And at its heart was Granny Moses, played with fiery brilliance by Irene Ryan. What came next wasn't just fame, it was television history being written, one punchline at a time. The Beverly Hillbillies phenomenon. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered in 1962, no one expected it to become an instant smash. But within just 3 weeks, it soared to the top of the Nielsen ratings, becoming the fastest show to hit #1 in TV history. At the center of its success was Irene Ryan as Granny. Her character was unlike anything else on television. Gritty, hilarious, sharp-tongued, and fiercely loyal. She was the show's backbone, bringing comedic energy that anchored every episode. Irene's performance earned her not just laughs, but accolades. She received 2 Emmy nominations for her role, standing out in a cast of quirky characters. Audiences loved Granny's no-nonsense attitude, her homemade remedies, her shotgun diplomacy, and her tender heart, hidden beneath the gruff exterior. She stole every scene she was in, not with glamour or melodrama, but with precise, old-school comedic timing that felt effortless. Her years of experience in vaudeville, radio, and film had prepared her for this moment, and she seized it with both hands. But what made Irene even more remarkable was the contrast between her on-screen and off-screen selves. In real life, she was warm, soft-spoken, and gracious. Unlike Granny, she wasn't interested in fights or feuds. She didn't seek fame. She loved the work. She loved the joy it brought others. She was the kind of co-star who made set life easier for everyone. Fans who met her without her Granny costume often didn't recognize her until she spoke. Her voice always gave her away. That voice, that laugh, that spark, it belonged to Irene Ryan, the star who won America's heart. Yet even with the spotlight shining bright, something inside Irene never settled. The applause was real, the fame undeniable, but behind her smile lived a quiet anxiety. Decades in showbiz had taught her how fragile success could be. And even as Granny, Irene Ryan still feared the one thing that haunted her most, being forgotten. A quiet fear, Irene's hidden anxiety. Despite all her success, Irene Ryan was never at peace with fame. Beneath the wigs and witty one-liners lived a woman who never stopped looking over her shoulder. She often confessed that she believed she could be fired at any moment. Her confidence, surprisingly, didn't match her talent. She had been in the business long enough to know how quickly things could change, and how ruthless show business could be, especially to women her age. "I'm always the first on set," she once said in an interview. "I figure if I'm the first in, I'll be the last out." Her work ethic was unmatched, not just because she loved the job, but because she feared losing it. That fear came from years of hustling for roles, being told she wasn't right for a part, or that she was too old or too comic. Even with Emmy nominations and sky-high ratings, she couldn't shake the early wounds of rejection. Her dedication wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. She never let it show on camera. Her anxiety was masked by perfect timing, well-delivered jokes, and a smile that hid the storm. Colleagues admired her discipline, not knowing it came from a place of insecurity. To the world, she was a television titan, but in private moments, she still saw herself as the little girl from El Paso who had to prove she belonged. That tension, the joy of fame and the fear of losing it, defined much of her late career. It made her sharp, it made her humble, and it made her deeply human. But away from the studio lights and sitcom scripts, there was another Irene, one that few fans got to know. The real woman behind the granny mask was soft-spoken, generous, and deeply in love with the art of performance. Her fame never reached her ego, and her personal life told a quieter, even sweeter story. Life off camera, the real Irene Ryan. Behind the curtain, Irene Ryan was a different woman. Gone were the thick curls and tough attitude. At home, she was modest, thoughtful, and often introspective. She preferred books to parties, quiet evenings to Hollywood events. Without the costume, she could walk down the street unnoticed, until she opened her mouth. "My voice gives me away," she once said. "I open my mouth, and they know." That signature voice, raspy and expressive, was impossible to hide. Though she was most famous for television, it was the stage that truly owned her heart. She had never stopped loving the energy of a live audience, the adrenaline, the risk, the rawness. "Nothing beats live theater," she'd say, and she meant it. Even during the height of the Beverly Hillbillies, she longed to return to the stage. For Irene, the applause of a live crowd wasn't just flattering. It was fuel. Television brought her fame, but theater made her feel alive. Her generosity was equally notable. She quietly donated to acting schools, sponsored young talent, and supported behind-the-scenes crew members when they were in need. She never chased luxury or flaunted her wealth. In fact, she lived rather simply compared to many of her peers. Co-stars often said she was the easiest person to work with, kind, consistent, and never seeking attention. Her true legacy wasn't just in the characters she played, but in the quiet kindness she gave behind the scenes. And then, just when most actresses were slowing down, Irene Ryan made a bold return to where her heart truly belonged, the Broadway stage. At age 70, when most were thinking of retirement, she signed up for something that would challenge her spirit, her voice, and her stamina like never before. Broadway Dreams, Reinvention at 70. In 1972, Irene Ryan returned to the stage in a way no one saw coming, by joining the Broadway cast of Pippin. Cast as Berta, the show's lovable and wise grandmother, Irene stunned audiences night after night. Her big number, No Time at All, wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. With lyrics about living boldly and never looking back, it became a personal anthem for her. She sang it with humor, strength, and a twinkle in her eye. At 70 years old, Irene wasn't just keeping up. She was stealing the show. Audiences gave her standing ovations, and theater critics took notice. She earned a Tony Award nomination for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. Every night, she danced, sang, and lit up the stage like someone decades younger. It was proof that talent doesn't fade with age. It evolves, deepens, and glows. Her voice may have grown raspier, her steps slower, but her stage presence had never been stronger. What made it even more powerful was how unexpected it was. No one imagined that Granny from the TV screen would transform again into a Broadway sensation. But Irene had always defied expectations. This was the final act of a career that had gone from dusty vaudeville stages to Hollywood sitcoms to the bright lights of Broadway. And she didn't just survive each era, she owned them. For Irene Ryan, Pippin wasn't a comeback, it was a victory lap. But just as her Broadway revival was reaching new heights, tragedy struck. One moment, she was center stage, and the next, gone. The final act of Irene Ryan's life came too soon, shocking the world and silencing a voice that had made generations laugh. Tragedy strikes, Irene's sudden collapse. In March of 1973, while performing in Pippin, Irene Ryan collapsed on stage. At first, the audience thought it was part of the act, but it wasn't. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with glioblastoma, a fast-moving and aggressive form of brain cancer, along with arteriosclerotic heart disease. Just weeks later, on April 26, 1973, she passed away. The news devastated her fans, colleagues, and the entire theater community. It was a painful irony that a woman who brought so much joy would suffer such a sudden and cruel ending. Co-stars from Pippin and the Beverly Hillbillies shared their shock. Many spoke of her energy, her discipline, and her kindness, still present even in her final weeks. Broadway dimmed its lights in her honor, and tributes poured in from both television and stage circles. For someone who had always feared being forgotten, she was remembered loudly and with love. Her passing marked the end of an era, not just for fans of Granny Moses, but for anyone who admired the grit it took to reinvent yourself again and again. She had worked nearly up to her final day, doing what she loved most, performing. For Irene, there was no such thing as slowing down. Life was about momentum, motion, and meaning. And even though she didn't get a long goodbye, she left behind a legacy that would echo far beyond the curtain call. Yet in true Irene fashion, even in death, she was thinking ahead, not of herself, but of others. Her final act wasn't a performance. It was a gift, a $1 million gesture that would change lives and ensure her legacy lit up more than just screens. It lit up futures. A fortune left behind. The scholarship surprise. When Irene Ryan's will was read, it held one last surprise. She left her entire estate, valued at around $1 million, not to family, friends, or Hollywood foundations, but to a scholarship fund. The Irene Ryan Acting Scholarship was established to support aspiring theater students across the country. Her fortune, modest by celebrity standards, became a golden ticket for the next generation of performers who, like her, dared to dream. The decision shocked many. She had no children of her own, and her personal relationships were mostly private. But this final act made everything clear. Irene's true family had always been the stage, and she wanted to ensure that others had a chance to chase the same spotlight she did, regardless of background or wealth. The scholarship still exists today, awarded to students through the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival. Thousands have benefited, using the money to pay for training, tuition, and opportunity. It was the kind of legacy Irene Ryan would have wanted. Not flashy, not about status, but deeply meaningful, a gift rooted in her lifelong love of performance. Even in death, she continued to uplift, to give, to believe in the transformative power of theater. For those students, she wasn't just Granny Moses. She was a guardian angel of the arts, a reminder that success isn't measured just by awards, but by what you leave behind for those who come next. But while her legacy lived on in theaters and scholarship halls, one mystery still lingers quietly in the hills of Hollywood, a house she left behind, untouched, abandoned, and filled with echoes of a life both celebrated and strangely forgotten. The Abandoned House, a Hollywood mystery. Tucked away in Los Angeles, the home once owned by Irene Ryan now sits empty and eerily still. Overgrown weeds creep up the walkway. Dust coats the windows. And inside, time has frozen. Urban explorers who have ventured in describe a surreal scene. Old photo albums, newspaper clippings, and scripts still scattered about, as if Irene simply stepped out one day and never returned. It's a place steeped in silence, haunted not by ghosts, but by history. For fans, the house feels like a hidden museum, one that was never curated, only paused. There are relics of the Beverly Hillbillies, even handwritten notes on old joke setups. Yet no one has restored it. No one has turned it into a monument. It remains as it was, an untouched chapter of a woman who gave everything to performance. Some say it feels like she's still there, her presence tucked in every dusty corner and worn-out chair. But perhaps that's fitting. Irene Ryan never craved the spotlight in her private life. She wasn't the type to build shrines or monuments. Her legacy wasn't meant to be encased in glass. It was meant to live on stage, in scholarships, in laughter. The house may crumble, the paint may peel, but her story, her voice, her kindness, those live on. And for anyone who ever smiled at Granny's sass or stood in awe during Pippin, Irene Ryan is never truly gone.